Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So I met with Wes a few months ago, and he was telling me that he was going on sabbatical and that they were looking for people to speak at the church while he was gone. And I was excited, and I shared with him my hope to be able to speak with you all, because I've had friends throughout the years who have gone to this church and have just really enjoyed spending time in your community. And so I was excited to share a little bit. As it says, I am staff for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and my main focus is international students. And the reason why starts back in 2009, when my wife and I were invited to go to China on a global project. Global project is essentially a time where we go to another country, and through teaching English and American culture, we build relationships and share the gospel, especially to places that could be otherwise closed. And so we ended up going to China. And the interesting thing is, actually, I was called to be a missionary to China when I was 6 years old. I don't really have time to sort of share that today, but ask me later during the potluck and I can share with you guys that story. It's pretty neat. So we traveled to Beijing, and we were taught a crash course in Chinese to survive. And then they took us to downtown Beijing, to a lot of the street vendors, to help us understand some of the culture. And one of my first experiences, we were talking to a few specific people, and every once in a while somebody would come up and offer us to buy something. And I would always, say what I was taught, which is "bu yao," downtown, means no thank you. "Bu yao." But after like 3 or 4, I think I started slipping a little bit in my language. And instead of saying "bu yao," I said "bu yao," which I know it doesn't sound very different, but instead of saying no thank you, "bu yao" means don't bite me. So for the next 30 minutes to 40 minutes, I kept telling people don't bite me in the streets of China. And wondering why people were looking at me in such a bizarre face. And I realized then that, you know what? Being in another country is hard. Culture is difficult. Language is difficult. And so we spent the next 6 weeks teaching English and American culture. And what they lovingly told us was a small city, which being born and raised in Morgantown, West Virginia, thinking a small city would be, 100,000 people, showing up to a city of 2 million people. Yeah, that was a little bit of a shock to me. And so spending time there for 6 weeks, my wife and I both had a heart for internationals. Because luckily for us, we had a Chinese liaison named Apple who was able to intercede for us whenever we needed help with language or explaining a situation. So when we came back home, we started praying and thinking about just this experience. And we soon came to realize that, you know what? There are actually a lot of internationals at WVU. And there are actually a lot of internationals that work and live in Morgantown. And so, luckily at that time, my dad was the Associate Dean of Engineering, and he was able to give me a printout of all of the international students that were attending the university at that time. 1,840. And so we quickly went to the international office that we found. And we asked them, hey, is there anyone who is reaching out to international students? And they said, well, we have one young couple that's working through the Christian Missionary Alliance Church. But other than that, no. And we were devastated by this because there's over 20 Christian ministries on campus at WVU. And none of them were specifically focused on international students. And so my wife and I knew exactly on that day that we wanted to start an international focused ministry at WVU. So we went, we got developed, we went through all of the process. And we soon started to just love and care for international students. And it was through our partnership with the university that we really made some inroads with that. But one day I was spending my quiet time, and I read this passage, Luke 19, 1 through 10. And I thought to myself, man, Zacchaeus, he is the marginalized. Marginalized, defined by Oxford, is a person, group, concept, or something that is treated as insignificant or peripheral. Now, for Zacchaeus, the reason why he was marginalized is not only because he was short for that time, and according to a lot of scholars, 5 feet tall was around the average height. So he was a little less than 5 feet tall. But he was also the chief tax collector. And the chief tax collector in this time was essentially someone hired by the Roman government to take taxes from the people. And they were despised. They were hated. Zacchaeus was not loyal to Judah or Israel. He was loyal to Rome. But see, that didn't stop Jesus, though. And this is something that I love about Jesus in this passage. So Zacchaeus made a choice to be marginalized. He chose to become a tax collector. But Jesus was able to see him for who he was and loved him even because of that choice. I just can't imagine what it was like being Zacchaeus. People calling out his name, yelling at him, probably saying some things that weren't very nice. But you could tell that the Holy Spirit was moving in Zacchaeus. It says in verse 3 that Zacchaeus was already excited and curious about meeting Jesus. In verse 4 it says he ran ahead and climbed a tree to see Jesus, which at this day and age for his position was very improper. And a sycamore tree is sort of related to a fig tree, so it actually wasn't that difficult to climb. So how did Jesus care for Zacchaeus the marginalized? Well, in verse 5, he calls him by name. Which, if you understand, especially in being in other cultures, names are so important. He invited himself in verse 5 to Zacchaeus' house, which at this day and age was so improper because no matter what your stature was, you never invited yourself to someone's house. But in verse 6, you notice that Zacchaeus doesn't even hesitate to bring him in. And not just that, but he's full of joy. And so Jesus goes home and spends time with Zacchaeus and his friends. Now, we talked a little bit about why Zacchaeus was marginalized, or how he was marginalized. And we can look at verse 7. It talks about the crowd grumbling. Why is Jesus spending time with that guy? Because he was an outcast. But something interesting happens during this time. We see radical transformation. Now, I've talked to you guys a lot about my experience with international students on campus. But this is also a very important part for us as a community when we think about our neighbors, when we think about those that may be marginalized within our own communities. I think of an example of our neighbors when we lived in Woodburn area. And he came to us one day and told us that he wanted to just put a gun in his mouth and just end it all. Now, why he came to us and why he shared that with us, I have no idea. But he knew that we would love and care for him. And right there on that spot, we prayed with him. And the most fantastic thing happened. And we saw transformation happen within his household. Now, it didn't exactly happen as soon as we prayed for him. But days later, you saw him taking his family to church. You saw him getting a job, doing what he loved, which was welding. You saw his wife sharing with us how much of a change that had occurred in his life. And how he was no longer absent with his children, but that he was a part of it. And that's just one example. They're marginalized all over our neighborhoods. When I think about our new neighborhood on Des Moines Avenue, we have a neighbor who was struggling with food and didn't have any presents for her children for Christmas. We had a single mother who was struggling to both watch her kids and work at the exact same time. We had a neighbor who just went through a very difficult divorce and was struggling with what it was like being a young man, now early divorced. Or someone who just lost their wife of over 20 years and was now coping with how to live life on his own. These are our neighbors. These are the marginalized. These are the ones who no one really thinks about or pays attention to. So back to Zacchaeus, where we see the radical transformation. Zacchaeus says, "Behold, Lord, I give half of my goods that I give to the poor. Now, the interesting thing is, in this passage, the Greek is a present. It's didome, where it talks about now, immediate. Like, it's not, oh, like Jesus, I'm just going to give half of my goods over the span of a few months to years. No, it was today, now, I give half my goods. And he goes well above the necessary giving of 20% and gave 50. And not just that, but he says, if I have wronged anybody, I will pay back fourfold, which is the same penalty as theft in fair civic law. And what happens with this radical transformation? We see redemption. I saw it with our neighbors, that they were redeemed, that they found a church home that loved and cared for them, that they found a marriage that was redeemed, relationships with his wife and children. And we see that in Zacchaeus. In verse 9, Jesus talks about salvation that was given because of his heart change. And not just that, but in verse 9, Jesus redeems Zacchaeus by welcoming him back to the Jewish community. And when I read this passage, I think about myself. And I think about the international students that people are not paying attention to on campus. Or the neighbors that no one is paying attention to. And I think about how much I want to redeem them and send them back to the community by showing the love of Jesus, by sharing with them who Jesus is so that they can become a follower of Jesus. And I'm always moved. I am always moved by that. Whenever it happens, whether it's stories from friends, whether it's my own experiences. So where do we see this in our own lives? Where have you guys seen it in your lives? Do you have neighbors? Do you have friends? Have you seen students on campus that are not focused on? And have you thought about ways of caring about them? And one of the things that I loved is coming today, driving to church, and I see that sign that's so welcoming in both English and in Arabic. And I think of all of my Muslim friends that I spend time with and how they feel loved in a place that they feel like no one cares for them. And I am so thankful that you guys have a heart for that. And I'm thankful that you see and understand God's calling for us in the marginalized. So, going into that, why is this important? You're probably asking yourself, Jeremy, this is great. I still may not understand fully why Zacchaeus was marginalized. I understand, and I'm going to be spending time here later during the potluck to talk a little bit more with you, but I only have 6 minutes left, and so I'm trying to be faithful to my time into you. But why is this important? 70% of international students that go to the United States, within my context, never see the inside of an American household. 70%. 80% of international students never actually make a significant friendship with an American during their time in college. And so what does that mean? The international students that come here, they are the cream of the crop. They are the very top. And their experiences from here are going to help define the rest of their life. And I want to be a part of that by helping them understand that as a follower of Jesus, I was loving and caring. I wanted to show them why I believed what I believed. And at the same time, I wanted to welcome them with open arms. And that's what I love about this church too. You guys are so welcoming. I mean, when I walked in, I saw a bunch of fruits and vegetables. I guess more vegetables than fruit at the front entrance. But I thought to myself, man, more international students need to see this. They need to see a group of people that want to share in God's creation. And so it's really important for me as well to develop these students, even if they don't make a decision to follow Jesus, to have that seed planted in them. Because I know that the Holy Spirit, even though I'm not there anymore, is still working inside of them when they're back home. And I try really hard to get them connected to a church or a community, or even an underground network if it's a closed country, so that they can continue their growth. And Skype is an amazing tool that I get to spend with them. So in the last few minutes, I asked the question of, so what can you do? I think we all need to develop a better understanding for both the marginalized in the university, but also in our own neighborhoods. I think it's important to get cross-cultural training. I know in the United States, sometimes we think we are the center of the world, and that we don't really need to understand other cultures or languages. Now, I'm not directly talking to you, but I'm talking about Americans in general. But we need to learn cross-cultural training. Second, Jesus does a wonderful job in this passage to teach us about taking risks. He goes to the one man in this whole crowded area that is despised and hated. and he invites him into his life. So what would it look like for you to invite yourselves more further into your neighbors' lives? Or even further, come on Friday nights when we eat dinner. Wes does it, not all the time, but he comes often. And he gets to have some amazing spiritual conversations with students. And here's the beautiful thing about international students. They don't care how old you are. Now, you guys know better than any. When Wes has his beard, he looks like a very well-wizened man. But when he shaves his beard off, he looks, if he colored his hair, he looked like he was in his late 40s, Could almost be my older brother, almost. So you can invite yourselves into the lives and take risks. What else can you do? Start sharing and having spiritual conversations. And if you're thinking to yourself, Jeremy, I don't know what that looks like, or maybe I'm out of practice a little bit. We can talk about that afterwards. There are some very easy ways and steps into starting spiritual conversations with people. And it doesn't have to be heady. It doesn't have to be spiritually dense. You can learn how to share about the gospel in a culturally sensitive and relevant way. Understanding that there are some cultures that are honor shame, or understanding some cultures that are power structure. You can use practical ways in meeting the needs of the marginalized. And just thinking about, within my context, transportation. My goodness, Walmart is what, 20 minutes away on opposite sides of Morgantown. And when you don't have transportation, it makes it very difficult. Or the mall, that's another 15 minutes the opposite way. Community. You guys are awesome at community. Use that. I keep telling Wes all the time, I try to encourage international students to come see your community so that they could see what you guys have and bring to the table. But that's something where you could also come and meet them, because it's hard for them to also take that risk. Food is another wonderful way. If you guys ever want to make something that's a family recipe or some sort of special dish, we would love to serve that on our Friday night gatherings, so that you could share a part of who you are with international students. And then one that I don't think people really think about a lot, but I think this church understands: the environment. Why not be a good steward to the places in your neighborhoods? Or to areas where maybe the marginalized don't really have much of a chance to go to, or it's the only place they have to go. So I want to thank you guys. I know I ran a little bit over. And I want to encourage you that if you have any questions, or if you'd like to process more with me, I will be at the potluck, and I would love to chat with you guys more about your questions or how you could be involved. but I look forward to that time with you guys. Thank you so much.